In this lesson, we're going to cover some rebalancing techniques. These will include 2 points of contact, the harmony leash and handle, and the T-touch connector. So 2 points are better than one. And a single point of contact, whether it's just a collar, a head collar, a leash, either on the front or the back, means that you have less choice. So that also limits your ability to influence the dog. A harness that is just on the back will trigger more forward pull or more forward movement, which in some cases is what you want in terms of tracking or in a sled dog harness. But most people don't want their dogs to do that. Now, the front ring may impede forward, but it generally brings the dogs out of balance. So what happens is you end up seeing dogs that are pulled to the side, or in some cases that the harness is so low on the shoulders that it's one of the reasons that they can't pull forward. Our interest is to actually help dogs come and be more in balance rather than be out of balance. So in the 1990s, when we first started our training for working with dogs, we started using 2 points of contact because we realized that if we had more ways to influence the balance, it would influence movement, it could make it easier for the dogs to cooperate, and we could really concentrate on this concept of being in balance physically, emotionally, and mentally. And this was helping the dogs become more in balance. So you can see here is we started this 2 points of contact. So there was a hand on one end of the leash. The leashes had clips on both ends. So one hand would be on the front part of the leash and one on the back. And this works really well. And it gives you quite a bit of precision. It's not so easy to learn. And what we've actually found is that there's a lot more pressure than we think that we're putting on them. But this is kind of how that picture would look. So if we think about 2 points and using a handle versus 2 hands on the lead, the pros for using the handle are it's much easier to teach clients. The average person can pick up on using the handle very quickly, in my experience. It allows more freedom for the dog. So we're not kind of always, in a way, it's not always about doing something to the dog. So we can really give the dogs a little bit more chance to cooperate with us and give them more space. It's easier for clients if they're walking 2 dogs, if they're carrying groceries, or if they're, say, pushing a baby carriage. It allows both of them to walk in balance. Now, the cons of it, well, you have less precision through the labyrinth, which is a very small part of the work that you'll do in real life. And it requires, if you know how to do 2 hands on leash, it requires learning something new, which isn't always the easiest thing to do. So the leash and handle, and this idea, I first got this idea from the Freedom Harness people, and they have a single length leash, that double-ended leash that has a handle on it that slides. What I found is that sometimes the handle, the leash was too long and sometimes it was too short. So they weren't really interested in changing the length. They felt that for their purposes, it worked well. And so I decided I would make my own. So we made one that the leash adjusts, and it has a really nice fleece handle on it that actually Sarah Harris in the UK came up with the idea of this nice fleece handle. So the handle slides back and forth between the front attachment and the back attachment. And what that means is it avoids any kind of hard pull on either one of them. So in a way, it actually helps to divide the pressure, which helps to reduce the opposition reflex, which is the primary reason that dogs pull. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The other thing about the handle that we've noticed is that if a person is nervous, perhaps they have a dog that has a tendency to be reactive, they can hold quite tightly onto that handle, and it doesn't send the same kind of message down the leash for the dog. So that's a really big advantage. Plus, if you don't have really strong hands, it's a nice soft feeling, and it gives you something that you have a good feel on. So here's kind of what it looks like. And the leash and handle in itself is, you can really use it on any harness that has a front and back attachment. We made our own that is a harness that doesn't have to go over the dog's head, but really any harness. And this harness on the left is just a regular H harness, has a front ring, has a back ring. It worked just as well with that. So here's a video of a Labrador who was very forward going on the leash. And you can see I'm going to be walking her with a leash and handle. And you can see that my hand can be quite relaxed. And I've got the leash fairly short so that I don't have to raise my hand very high. So to stop, I'm going to do a little bit of a lifting up rather than having forward and back pressure. So I'm going to make a little contact. I'm going to take my hand up. I'm going to slowly release, take the hand up just a bit so she can come in balance, and then release and step forward. So for the turn, what I want to do is I really want to be able to step forward, and I'm not doing a great job there. If I can step forward with my inside foot. Now, these little dogs barking in the background had been quite annoying for Sally. And when she was on her regular leash, she went mad barking at these dogs. So anytime your dog stops, whether it's to pee or do whatever, take the opportunity of stepping forward. So I'm going to make a little meet and melt. Now my left hand could come forward a bit more. That would be better. Okay, I wait, and then I rotate my body and I point in the direction I want the dog to go. But it gives me a lot of opportunity of being able to release the lead. That's it. And you can see that she's not paying a lot of attention to those dogs, even though they are barking quite a bit. And now she's standing nicely in balance. And that's what I'm looking for, is that ability for the dog to actually be able to stand in balance. And it means that, first of all, I have to, as a handler, release that pressure and trust that the dog can do it. And that in itself is really important and makes a very big difference. So here's some photographs of meet and melt that were actually taken from the same time that video was. So she's reacting actually to those little dogs that were barking, and they were on the kind of other side of the pool. So on the upper left, I take the contact, that's the meet, and then I slowly melt the contact. And that it's just, I often say to people, it's like an ice cream cone melting, not on a hot day, but on a cool day. So it's not a drop, but rather it's just this kind of slow release or melt, which actually comes from Peggy Cummings and Connected Riding. So then I can allow her to stand, and you can see, even though she's not standing in perfect balance, she's a little bit leaning forward, she's not pulling forward. And even in the lower left, you see she started to bark in response to those dogs, but she didn't pull forward on the lead. And that was mostly in part because I did not have pressure against her. So I'm just allowing her to be able to stand in balance. And then she stops barking and she's able to maintain, to be able to stand there. So from the leash and handle connection came the T-Touch connector. And the original idea came from Finland. And there was one of our practitioners went home to Finland. She was in the training and she went home and she had 4 border terriers, and she thought she'd really like to be able to walk them all together, but liked the idea of having this connector, or the leash and handle, the sliding bit. So a friend of hers who makes dog equipment came up with the idea to shorten the length of the piece, like say our leash piece, and on that she added a little sliding tab. And so one end of the leash snapped to that sliding tab, which had 2 points on one dog. And the second one also did the same thing. So in each leash that had a double-ended snap, one snap was to one dog and one was to the other, and the handle was in her hand. It worked really brilliantly. Now, I haven't used it so much for that. I tend to use it mostly on dogs by themselves. It really divides the pressure between the front and the back. And I believe that it's the physics of it, that when we shorten that distance in space, we can give them more room. So we can give them a longer leash when we want to let our dogs sniff. We still want them to stay in balance, but we want to be able to let them have more space. So this is really helpful with dogs that are extremely forward going or hard pullers, because you can let that line slide, which it's only that pressure against that really creates that opposition. And people will often say, well, they'd fall, you'd fall over if they didn't stop pulling, but really we allow them to find their way back to balance when we're not putting them in that state of opposition. So it's really fun. Now I have a couple of videos that I'll be able to show you. So we have an interesting exercise that will show you how to do this so that you can feel the exercise and or notice it on your dog. So you can either use a little stuffy dog if you have one and attach a leash and handle to it. And it's helpful to use a front attachment only, and then a back attachment only, and then the connector. And what you'll see is that either way, it's a harder on the dog because there's more pull either to the side, pulling them out of balance, or having them sent forward. So the T-Touch connector, ideally, this is on Ollie, who is our wrap dog. Ideally, the connector is long enough that the dog can switch from one side to the other so that the leash can kind of come over their head from one side to the other, but short enough that they don't easily step in it. And part of that, how them not stepping in it, is going to be you as the handler making sure that you're kind of just paying attention to the lead, and even at a distance, if you stroke it a little bit to keep it off the ground, it's pretty easy to do once you get the hang of it. And even if they do step over it, it actually doesn't create the same kind of pull because you're not pulling them out of balance one side or the other. And we use different size connectors depending on the size of the dog. And just like the leashes, I made the connectors adjustable so that there's probably a 4-inch or 10 centimeter variability that you can do so that you can make sure that it slides well, that if it's appropriate, that it can come from one side to the other. And this is our little dog, Harvey, and he is 16 this year, and he's a Jack Russell. And you'll notice that his feet are extremely flat. When he came to the SPCA, his nails were really, really overgrown, and his feet were extremely flat. But he is a dandy little dog, and he can be very forward going on the leash, and it makes a big difference when you can use the connector with him. And you see, it means I can give him more space. And with a small dog, when you have that attached leash to the front, the longer leash, it's almost always coming up close to their eye. And so the connector sits a little lower. And what we found is that most dogs are more comfortable with that, especially the smaller dogs, but the larger dogs as well. Now, if you don't have a connector, or maybe you don't have the right size, you could take an old leash, or you could take a rope and tie snaps onto the end if you can, or double your leash over, and then add a ring to act as a slider. Now, the challenge is the rings come off pretty easily, which is why we developed a tab that kind of stays on the leash more easily. So in order to help them stop and balance, what we can do is we're going to stroke as we step up the line, and you can come either from the side like a water skier would, or come straight up. It depends on the position that you're in with your dog. And the idea with this is that if the pressure is coming from the back and there's a forward lean, right? That's the opposition part. As we stroke up, what happens is we change the balance from being forward and back to being up and down. So now what happens is there's connection on the front of the leash as well as on the back, but it's going straight up rather than being at an angle backwards. And what that does is allows the dog to come back into balance so that they're not falling on the forehand, which is the place that most of them are most of the time. So here's a little video, just a short video of Harvey with the T-Touch connector, walking with him. And you can see we can have a nice loose leash, and then I can stop with a little bit of a lift and a pause and a slow melt. So I can stroke the lead. I have to slowly melt because he's often falling forward. That's all right. That's it. And then I step forward and I can keep going forward. Okay, and this is a dog, I'm hoping there's not too much noise in this. This was a lovely flat-coated retriever who was extremely pulley, and I wish I'd gotten a video of this dog before, because when we put the connector on it, the dog's completely different this was literally when we put it on her and how much easier she was. There's a bit of noise in the background, so I couldn't quite figure out how to get rid of it, but let's see. So she's walking, and you can see that she's forward with the dog. She can just turn the dog a little bit, guide the dog slightly with her finger to point it. But the dog is walking, actually not pulling, which was really a very big difference for this dog. And there were a lot of distractions in the room, and the dog was just very easily coming with her loose leash. And the thing with the shorter leash, she just has to lift her hand a little bit, but there's no raising of your hand at all to do that. So I thought this was a really nice little video. Whoopsies, got a scratch. And that was, the woman that owns the dog was really happy with that change. So the T-Touch connector is a great stepping stone for dogs who are really pulley, so that then when you do need to have them closer to you, and maybe you want to use the leash handle, the regular leash and handle, and have it a little bit shorter, the dogs understand that little lift at the front, and it shifts their weight back, so you don't get that, that hard pull. And there are times when you do need to have your dog on a shorter leash, and that you might want to have just one hand on the lead. So you want to pay attention to the length of the connector and play a little bit with the adjustment to find out what's the most appropriate for you and your dog. Now, the most challenging dogs to fit are the short-legged dogs with the long noses, particularly Dachshunds, who have that tiny short legs and quite a long nose. Sometimes some Basset Hounds, because they're fairly bulky, and some Corgis, because their heads, they have short legs, basically. And so you may not always be able to have the leash be able to slide easily from one side to the other, but actually it still works really well for helping them be in better balance when they're on a lead, without having to always be it's sort of a training situation, because many dogs walk well on a loose leash when you're in a training scenario, but not so much once you get out into the real world where there's a lot of interesting things to do. Now, we had an interesting situation. I was in Australia and at one of the conferences, and we were showing people how to use the leash and the connector and the harness. And a dog trainer who has quite a reactive dog watched a bit of video, and we explained to her how to do it. And she came back the next day, and she said she had gone home and put the situation, the configuration on her dog, took her dog off to the beach. She said that just by using a little bit of the stroking, the connector, being able to move her dog easily, it reduced his reactivity, she said, by at least 60%. And so she's been using that with all of her clients, and she has a daycare and so on, and has found it to be really, really successful. So I hope that this gives you some ideas, and there'll be more videos that'll go along with the lesson in order for you to get a better idea of how to use it, and let us know how it goes.